is Phil Rees. I've spent much of my career meeting men and women called terrorists in the West. It used to be said that one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. But after 9/11, that seemed to change.
Either you are with us, or you are with the terrorists.
Western politicians list dozens of terrorist organizations. I'll be breaking bread with those labeled terrorists by the West and ask, when does a man have the right to fight without being called a terrorist? For the next 6 weeks, I'm taking a journey along the borders of the West's war on terror to try and determine the meaning of a word: terrorist. I travel to the crucible of this global conflict, Afghanistan, where al-Qaeda was based. President Obama intends to double the US deployment here, with up to 30,000 additional troops in 2009. On a desolate mountainside, I join a platoon of US soldiers at an outpost on the front line of this war. They are overlooking the Korangal Valley. Taliban fighters from Pakistan pass through here. The border is only 20 kilometers away.
We're coming in the front gate at Firebase Vegas, and I'll just show you guys around.
Vegas.
Roger.
Sign here. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas.
Yeah, kind of. Watch your step here.
The troops call this ravine the Valley of Death. In the 5 months they've been here, they've been attacked more than 100 times. It is one of the most dangerous outposts in Afghanistan.
Yeah, we call this whole area no man's land, so we kind of try to stay out of it. If you're going to be out here, you got to have your full gear on. Rule of thumb is, if you can see the mountains, then they can obviously see you.
There are mountains everywhere.
Right? Yeah. Not saying they're just out there shooting. They're actually aiming, and they're getting a little better every time. Right now, I'm going to take you to one of our fighting positions that covers all our engagement area back here.
Martinez and his troops regularly defend the camp from Taliban fighters.
Once they've hit us with a large amount of force. It was about 40 individuals. And we got into a good little firefight with them, and they continued to advance, and it crossed the concertina wire. And we've had soldiers that were engaging with, well, obviously with direct fire, but we were also throwing hand grenades in that area. So that was a pretty bad day.
Do you regard your enemy as terrorists because this is a war on terror? You're on the front line of it.
Right.
I mean, how do you perceive them in that sense?
Actually, yeah, I do. I mean, they have cut the heads off of some of our workers. They do terrorize some of the villagers. Obviously, if we can keep them, the bad guys or the terrorists here in the valley fighting us, that's a lot better. I mean, I'd rather have it like that than to have them go and blow up some coffee shop or have another 9/11.
While the West and its allies confront an enemy called terror, it seems that we should at least know exactly who is a terrorist. My attempt to understand the meaning of terrorism began unexpectedly 3 decades ago. I was a college student and on holiday in Ireland. I'm following the same route that I took on a warm summer's day in 1979. I'm now in Northern Ireland, which is under British rule, but I'm driving south towards an international border. Beyond that, it's the Republic of Ireland, which fought for its independence from British colonial rule more than 80 years ago. At the time of my first visit, the Irish Republican Army, the IRA, was fighting for a united Ireland. As well as killing British soldiers, it planted bombs that targeted civilians. When I was a teenager growing up in the London area, the British media regularly referred to the Irish Republican Army as terrorists. They were evil murderers who used guns and bombs to try to end British rule in the north. At that time, I felt I knew who was a terrorist. But my views were challenged one night in a small pub in the farming town of Coot Hill, where the IRA had supporters. I was in this bar when, in August 1979, people cheered when they heard the evening news.
Lord Mountbatten and his young boatman were killed immediately.
The IRA had murdered the British Queen's uncle, Lord Mountbatten, and 2 teenagers. On the same day, there was a deadly ambush.
20 minutes and 300 yards separated 2 huge explosions, which claimed the lives of 18 soldiers in the most devastating attack the army have ever suffered here.
30 years later, I'm joining locals who remember that day well. And when the news came up on the television screen, there was a lot of support from people here. A lot of people clinking glasses, a lot of people saying, well, you know, good. And I mean, I must say, I was surprised by that as a young man.
Yeah, well, like, there was a war going on against British forces and the British Crown, like, and any act that was carried out like that was seen as a legitimate target. Coming with their army for to terrorise and harass the people of the country, we don't want them. Through really good...
For the first time, I understood how people seen as terrorists in one country can be seen very differently in another.
And they had to take up the gun. And I would class them people as freedom fighters. They were never terrorists in my eyes.
I think history will show that in most cases, the gun wins out.
After 3 decades of violence, the IRA was offered a deal by the British government. In return for laying down its weapons, political and social reforms were introduced in Northern Ireland.
I think violence can bring you so far, but at the end of it all, you're going to have to sit down and you're going to have to talk.
Definitely, it opens the discussion, so it does, to give people the right to talk, because before the violence in Northern Ireland, nobody listened to us.
After leaving Ireland, I went on to cover conflicts in various corners of the earth, meeting men and women labelled terrorists by their foes. By then, I considered it a word used by politicians and the partisan, not an impartial observer. But that appeared to change on one September morning. A short walk from the site of the World Trade Center is a memorial for the 3,000 people who died on that day. Crowds still gather to pay their respects.
The world has changed. This new phenomenon has made us rethink our basic principles. It is what I call terrorism without limit. In other words, they killed 3,000 people, but if they could have killed 30,000, they would have killed 30,000.
After 9/11, an ideological whirlwind swept through the West's political institutions, media, and think tanks. A view was formulated that 9/11 marked a new phase in human history.
Our war on terror begins with al-Qaeda, but it does not end there. It will not end until every terrorist group of global reach has been found, stopped, and defeated. The United States introduced a new doctrine that aimed to eradicate anything it considered terrorism. It was an attempt by neocon politicians to redefine the world. They called it the Global War on Terror.
It was their determination that this was an opportunity for America to go to war against every terrorist in every state that sponsored terrorists in the world.
Are you saying, therefore, that the war on terror and the language, therefore, used was in order to escalate the conflict beyond simply the perpetrators of 9/11?
Absolutely.
The phrase, the war on terror, was used to provide a moral basis for a conflict that Western leaders say will last a generation.
I don't want to hear they're going to help us anymore because they're not helping us.
But how does this war on terror unfold in countries where foreign soldiers are usually seen as an army of occupation? At Firebase Vegas on the Afghan border with Pakistan, US troops are listening to their platoon commander give his evening intelligence report.
36-124. Roger, left the ID, 2 individuals engaged and killed 1, injured another, break. The one that was...
Gunnery Sergeant Tello spent the afternoon in a gun battle with Taliban fighters, killing 1 and wounding another.
We identified 2 individuals carrying weapons, and that around here is a hostile intent. Everybody knows that they shouldn't be carrying them.
They're considered enemy if they carry a weapon.
Correct.
The US troops recovered 3 weapons, Afterwards, Gunnery Sergeant Teller realized he'd met the dead man while on a patrol 2 days earlier.
He introduced himself, we introduced ourselves, and he acted as if he was our friend and wanted to help us.
So you shook hands with the man you later found was trying to kill you?
I did.
Once a week, the Americans hold a traditional shura, a meeting to try to engage local village leaders. It's a chance for the Americans to persuade them to provide information on the Taliban. But yesterday's killing in the village of Chichal has made both sides uneasy.
They said before that if guys are going to be in their village that are bad guys, they're going to take care of them. But we've seen this guy in the village, and they didn't take care of him. He shot us yesterday, and we had to kill him.
We know what's going on in Chichal. You know, we know that everything he tells us isn't true. For 8 months, we found weapons. People have shot at us in this village. Time when I first got here, I wanted to believe him, that he wanted to help us. Yeah. But now I know who the liars are here. He can come to base every Wednesday if he wants. He ain't doing to help us. I don't want to hear they're going to help us anymore because they're not helping us.
This weekly ritual is part of the American goal of winning the hearts and minds of local people. But the soldiers believe the village elders are really on the side of the men they call terrorists. You're convinced that they knew everything of the events of yesterday?
Oh, absolutely.
No doubt.
Absolutely, because around the valley, everyone's known there's supposed to be a funeral for the guy today. You know, like, we're not stupid, and they're not stupid either, you know.
Do you think, though, they might be under threat from the Taliban as well, so that their cooperation with you puts them in a very difficult situation?
In a way, but honestly, I think a lot of the fighters are these guys' sons or relatives or cousins. Kind of remarkable that they're able to come in here after we've killed a guy and kind of, I don't know, like, I'd be pretty upset. Yeah, you know? As you can see, it's hard for us to figure out like who's bad and who's good. I'm just an infantry guy, you know. I'm a fighter, so it's hard for us to win the hearts and minds because if somebody shoots at us, we want to kill everybody.
Only a few minutes after the elders had left, the Americans were attacked.
If we're shooting at something, let's communicate so we can get effective fires on it.
6 Taliban fighters were firing at the base. Sergeant Martinez checks to ensure that none of his men have been hit.
Everybody good, man?
Encounters like this are an almost daily event. Today, none of the Americans were injured, but 4 months earlier, the Taliban shot down a helicopter as it brought supplies to the base, killing the pilot.
That was pretty close.
Yeah, they were close. They were pretty damn close.
Didn't take them long, did it, after
No. It's normally the way it is.
the elders meeting.
If immediately after the Shura, if it doesn't go well for them, this is normally what happens. They retaliate, hit us, and this one was a pretty good firefight, so it was a good one. Pretty decent. Not bad.
As the attackers fled, the Americans launched artillery strikes. While the United States considers the Taliban to be terrorists, exactly how to define a terrorist was being debated over 10,000 kilometers away. I'm on my way to the headquarters of the United Nations, a short distance from the wreckage of the Twin Towers. It was here that leaders from around the globe gathered to reach an agreement, once and for all, on the meaning of one word. In 2005, President Bush and Prime Minister Blair came here to try to create a global consensus on the meaning of terrorism.
There is not, and never can be, any justification, any excuse, any cause that accepts the random slaughter of the innocent.
You think of these new methods of, you drive a car bomb into a crowded market of people and just the first people who are there are killed. I couldn't justify any cause with that.
But the West's definition that deliberate targeting of civilians excludes bombs dropped on population centers during wartime. Western governments say they don't intend to kill the innocent. A former American diplomat believes this argument is a little dishonest.
It seems to me that there's very little difference to the people bombed, whether you intended that result or not. In Iraq, we have followed policies that we knew would result in huge numbers of civilian deaths.
Muslim countries argued that world leaders who order military action should be held accountable for any civilian deaths.
We said, yes, if there is going to be a definition, it should be a comprehensive one, which would cover not only actions by non-state actors, but by state actors as well. There is something which is also called state terrorism.
Muslim nations also demanded that groups fighting occupation should never be labeled terrorists.
ولذلك أمريكا تصنف من تريد بإرهابي ومن تريد ب
America decides who is a terrorist and who is a freedom fighter.
هي تصنف
They consider the collaborators who came with them to Iraq and Afghanistan as heroes and legitimate rulers.
بهؤلاء أبطال وقيادة شرعية بين تصنف كل قيادات.
But the resistance that wants to stop the killing, destruction, corruption and occupation, they call them terrorists.
والاحتلال بأنهم إرهابيين.
The discussions continued all day, but finally President Bush and Prime Minister Blair had to accept that the world's nations couldn't agree on a workable definition.
They're very good definitions of terrorism, but there's something wrong with them. They don't exclude our terrorism. So that the difficult problem that intellectuals struggle with and politicians struggle with is to craft a definition of terrorism which will be restricted to their terrorism against us, but will exclude our terrorism against them. And that really is a difficult problem.
Despite a lack of agreement within the United Nations or a consensus amongst academics and politicians, it is very easy in the United States to tell who is a terrorist. There is a list. After 9/11, the groups on the list were heavily scrutinized. In the West, anyone linked to these organizations was investigated. Those suspected of providing funds were arrested. It seemed terrorism, according to the West's definition, would no longer be tolerated. But there were also inconsistencies. It seems that some terrorists are more acceptable than others. The Mujahideen al-Haq, the MEK, is also on this list. But far from being vilified, Congress has passed a resolution praising the group, and the CIA has provided covert funding. Why? Because both the MEK and the US government share a common foe, Iran.
The enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Even if they're terrorists?
That seems to be the case.
The MEK had a military base in Iraq and remain fierce opponents of the Iranian government. They have assassinated dozens of Iranian officials.
I can tell you that when the terrorism report came across my desk as Chief of Staff of the State Department, I spent as much time laughing as I did anything else, and sometimes pulling my hair out what little I have left, because it reeks with politics. It reeks with politics.
Once we start moving up through the open area, we'll have to pick it up until we get up to the rock, because we'll be totally exposed to the enemy fighting positions on the side of the mountain.
Okay. Sergeant Mullins is escorting me to what the soldiers call the Rock, a gun position near Firebase Vegas. From here, the Americans can monitor traffic on the main road and provide covering fire for their colleagues at other outposts in the valley. You can see the road all down the valley.
Yeah, that's the Korengal Road. We've lost a total of, I think, 6 soldiers on it.
You lost 6 men down there?
Yep, IEDs, double-stacked anti-tank mines. And they're always watching.
Yeah? You think their eyes are on us now?
Oh, I guarantee it. I know they are. Even the people in the towns, I'd say, are watching us too, reporting to them. It's only a matter of time every day before they hit you. You just try to stay alert and try to watch for them before they can get to you.
But you know, you're on the front line of the war on terror. Do you regard these guys as terrorists?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, we come here to give these people a life and a government and, try to help them out. And they really, I don't know, they just don't want nothing better, I don't guess.
I mean, do you sometimes feel you don't quite know why you're here with these daily contacts and, not going from one place to the other, just firing back in exchange of fire?
No, I feel like I'm here because I'd rather do this now than my children have to do it 10 or 15 years from now. If we can win it here, it's going to take down terrorism quite a bit. I mean, and it sets the tone, and it basically lets the rest of the world know where America stands as far as terrorism.
Western forces plan to remain in Afghanistan for many years to come.
Well, I know I miss more than hit.
President Obama is committed to continuing a war that began in 2001 against so-called terrorists. In Afghanistan, the American definition of a terrorist is simple. It is anyone caught carrying a gun.
It's been the worst day since yesterday.
But this war has a wider significance beyond Afghanistan. The United States has constructed its first new military doctrine for half a century without a clear definition of who is the enemy. The West seems locked in a conflict based on a borderless, timeless, and unwinnable war on terror.
It's been the worst